Introversion and extroversion are the classifications of how and where you get energy from. Do you gain energy from spending time alone, or do you gain energy from being in social settings? While it is helpful to identify when and how you feel most at peace, there's a question of why. Why do introverts get more energy from spending time alone? Why do extroverts enjoy spending time with other people? And is extroversion and introversion a choice? I believe acting and social appropriateness plays a role in causing people to lose energy in social settings. Introverts tend to lose energy in social settings as they believe they need to behave in a socially acceptable manner in social situations. They feel there is a need to control their emotions and carefully manufacture an appropriate response. There's a lot of intellectual processing that comes with being in social situations for introverts, and arguably not enough emotional regulation that occurs with them in those settings. Introverts are easily tired from social settings, tend to be much more careful in creating a certain impression rather than genuinely connecting with people in large groups. Typically, group dynamics are not led by introverts, but this is not necessarily true. However, in one-on-one settings, introverts are given a space to occasionally control the dynamic and given more space to explore emotional responses without feeling pressured to behave in a certain manner. This can be examined when putting introverts in a one-on-one setting with people they are comfortable with. The quality of the conversation change and they are much more open to expressing emotional response. They also tend to be less tired despite being more intellectually involved in the conversation. It is arguable that the reason for being tired is not being intellectually based, but emotionally based. Conversations that may or may not appeal to them elicit an emotional response which they need to cautiously avoid betraying for the sake of respect for other people. Active listening, for example, is a prime example of why an introvert may be put into this situation, because you are proactively refraining from expressing yourself to give a platform to the other person. This becomes very mentally taxing after prolonged periods. This is the opposite spectrum from being overstimulated in social settings, although it is opposite sides of the same coin. Overstimulation is a hyper-awareness of the emotional response of surroundings and social settings and can lead to one of the 4 stress response mechanisms: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. While introversion is different from being stressed out in social situations, there are similarities and instances where people correlate the two. Extroverts, on the other hand, are less concerned with being socially appropriate, and more concerned with being whether the activity they are participating is productive and achieving a goal. These goals do not have to be major and can range from having interesting discussion to connecting with their audience through shared experiences. There's a dopamine high from achieving goals in social situations, which can lead to addiction. Addiction occurs when dopamine high of achieving a goal is valued over and is deemed more important than the process and after effects of achieving a goal. While addiction is typically associated with negative connotations such as drugs, alcohol, and smoking, anything can become an addiction, and an unhealthy obsession tends to create a detrimental effect, such as being a workaholic, sporting addiction, eating addiction, and even self-development addiction. The dopamine high of setting goals, however small or large they are, and achieving them is partially what causes addiction. Extroverts that keep to a busy schedule are productive in achieving goals, but may get tired from spending time by themselves because the dopamine high of achieving goals has worn off. The concept of a social battery of an individual person is an important concept because it measures how fulfilling a particular goal is and how often it is being triggered. For example, some people can feel comfortable being in social settings without being drained, as the act of coexisting and connecting with another person is what gives them energy. But the act of being socially appropriate is simultaneously eating at the same reserve of energy. There needs to be multiple goals being achieved simultaneously to prevent this reserve of energy from dissipating. Hence, introversion and extroversion are on the spectrum, and it is a choice because it is largely dependent on your perspectives of what is socially appropriate and your eagerness to create tasks and attribute goals to social settings. Labeling yourself as an introvert or extrovert can be productive to showcase how you prefer to connect with other people and yourself, and it can allow you to allocate more energy towards fulfilling situations. But it can be self-limiting. as labels in general do not allow for ambiguity. Even an extrovert can be tired from high-tension social situations, and introverts can be both intellectually and emotionally stimulated in public settings, such as public speaking, where they are able to direct and empower groups to discuss or explore concepts and ideas. An alternative will open you to the possibility to growth and self-development without labels like introverts and extrovert is to view yourself as an accumulation of all your experiences. This can be a difficult task, as we tend to see ourselves as having a holistic personality. But we drastically change over the course of a decade, and we will continue to change over the next few decades as we gain more experiences. Recency bias leads to the assumption that we always were a particular way, and it's not unless we acknowledge that we changed our thoughts and behaviors towards a similar situation that we realize we have become fundamentally a different person. This is not necessarily consequential. Just because we have the ability to grow and develop beyond ourselves, we are also quite capable of sliding back into old traits and personas as they are more accessible, comfortable, and more familiar. Once neural pathways are created, they always exist as a reminder of what our limits and potential are. What can be a trap is that while old personas and old coping mechanisms do tend to serve us well in particular situations, they are not the be-all, end-all, and may hinder further development. Simultaneously, we need to be cautious of environmental factors and media and perspectives we consume, as they will slowly erode the personality and the behavioral patterns we have previously constructed. We are very adaptable and resilient as a species, and environmental factors are important to our survival. We need to be deliberate because, like all things, 20% of who we are as a person accounts for 80% of how we see ourselves and how others see us. From a personal stance, we are unique based on the other 80%, but not many people would see those sides of us unless we choose to be chronically online, or they expect us to be exposed, or they are exposed to us in all types of situations over the course of years. While perceiving yourself as special could be a good way to gain confidence, and assigning the label of being special and unique as you're defining While perceiving yourself as special could be a good way to gain confidence, assigning this label of being special and unique as your defining characteristic also creates isolation and creates a fixed mindset. You are putting yourself in a box where you have limiting belief because you are preconceived to be a certain way. This is true even if you think of yourself as special in a positive or negative way. Simultaneously, seeing yourself as average may lead to normalizing unfortunate and traumatic experiences that warp your expectations and understanding of the world. While this may not seem like a big deal, it also causes a lot of frustration and miscommunication when your expectations are not aligned with reality. This is difficult to fix because it falls under the idea of common sense. Common sense as a phrase is mislabeled because everyone, to some extent, believes everyone else should have this common sort of knowledge ingrained into them, but forgets they learned it themselves as a child and that it's also very culturally, generationally, and ethically influenced. Overall, I will argue that most people are on a spectrum when it comes to introversion and extroversion, but this can be malleable, because once you identify why introversion and extroversion occurs, you can change it. However, with all things, moving up and down the spectrum takes time and effort, but this is much easier to do when the labels that help your self-awareness are let go for the sake of self-understanding. Introversion and extroversion are a conscious and consistent choice that occur over a significant number of years.